There are a lot of changes to Blazor in .NET 6. These are quality of life changes, not major shifts in how Blazor operates, but they're still great changes. In this video, we're going to look at a number of changes to Blazor that will directly impact and improve how you build Blazor apps. Now, if this is the first video you watched of mine, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. I provide videos twice a week here on YouTube to help you grow as a developer. I also have a full set of training courses on IamTimCorey.com. I encourage you to check out all the resources that I have to offer. Now, in this video, as with most of my videos, I'm going to create some source code. If you'd like a copy of the source code, use the link in the description. So let's go over to Visual Studio 2022. I am using the preview version because at the time of recording, it's not quite out yet, but it is a stable version of the new Visual Studio. You need that in order to get the .NET 6 templates in the file new or create new project dialog. So you can create them in the command line and do Visual Studio 2019 if you want, but for most of you, the upgrade to 2022 will be free because if you are an individual user or in a company that makes less than $1 million per year, you can use the Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition for free. So let's go to visualstudio.com and check that out. Okay, so in here, let's create I'm going to create a Blazor server app because there's a few more changes to Blazor server than to WebAssembly. So it's a little clearer to see in Blazor server versus WebAssembly. So we're going to do that. But really, just so you know, Blazor server and Blazor WebAssembly are practically the same thing. I get a lot of people pushing back and say, well, but how do you do that in Blazor WebAssembly? Because you did it in server. And the only code that really changes is the startup code and then the data access code. That's really the only big changes between the two because of the fact that Blazor WebAssembly lives fully on the client where Blazor server lives on the server and the client. So the actual Blazor code, though, all the Razor page stuff, that's all the same between both Blazors. So Blazor updates, let's call it Blazor updates. That's fine. These are the updates to .NET 6. So we're using a .NET 6 long-term supported branch or long-term supported version. There is no non-long-term support for .NET 6, just so you know. They're just saying that, hey, .NET 6 is the LTS branch, just like .NET Core 3.1 was. .NET 5 is not a long-term supported, which means its support will run out, I believe, shortly after 6 comes out. So I think it's 15 months, I believe, or 16 months, something like that. I think it's 15 months from the time it comes out, which means that it's got about 3.5 months left of support. It'll still work well beyond that, but .NET 6 will be supported for 3 years. So .NET 6, we're not going to do authentication. We'll leave HTTPS on, we should, and we're not going to enable Docker. So hit create, and this is just a standard Blazor server application. Okay, so that's what the app is. Okay, it's a standard app, but if you look at it and you remember what Blazor server 5, .NET 5 or previous looked like, you'll see a few differences. So let's look first at the Program.cs because we're missing startup.cs. So Program.cs is using the new format where we don't have to have a namespace or a class declaration or even a method declaration for our Program.cs. So it goes right to the root and we're able to write our code here without the that static void main wrapping it. That saves us about, I think it's 8 spaces per line, which is actually a pretty big deal. So it makes our code a little more compact. The other thing to note, though, like I said, there is no startup.cs. There used to be. But now, instead of having a program.cs and a startup.cs, we now have one file that does everything. So this is the complete startup. So we have web application.createBuilder, and then from there we do our registration of our services. That's our dependency injection. We build it out. We check if it's the dev environment or not the dev environment, and we wire up the exceptions. And we also turn on HSTS. This is only for production. So this using the exception handler or the error page means that we don't see those pages that say, hey, here's the line in your source code that has the problem. We don't want to see that in production. So we have HTTPS redirect, static files, routing. That's our routing. And then we have right here, this line hooks up our signal R since we're on Blazor server. And then we have our fallback to the host page. And you run. That's it. That's the entire program.cs. Essentially, it's just the startup.cs and program.cs crunched into one, and then using the new .NET 6 features of not needing the, again, the namespace, the class, or the method name. So that's where you're going to find everything related to your settings for Blazor server. Okay, so that's one big change. But then there's another big change, and this one I want to show you. So let's run this. So let's hit the start button, and we're going to launch Kestrel, which is our web server. And once this launches, we're going to get this page right here. But notice that it's a little different. There's something you might notice, you may not, but if you look here, let's zoom in and see if you can see it. Oh, my zoom tool is not working. There we go. So right here, that's a little different. So it used to be that Kestrel, which was one of the web server options we had, the other was IIS Express, but Kestrel used to be port 5000 was HTTP and port 5001 was HTTPS, and that was the same for every single project. But now Kestrel has a range that it generates random port numbers inside of. That way we can have multiple Kestrel projects running at the same time and not step on each other's toes. Now the other thing is let's leave this open, but let's kind of shrink it down. There's good. And we'll come back over here and we're going to shrink this down as well. Whoops, popped off the screen entirely. That's not what I wanted. So right now we have this feature right here. This is called Hot Reload. And this is built into practically everything now inside of Visual Studio. So if we check here, notice I have it checked, the box checked for Hot Reload on Save. So what this means is if I make a change, it will reload this page. So let's just do a small change here. Let's go to our index page and hello YouTube, and I'll hit save. When I do that, notice that on the right, this now changed to hello YouTube. I did not hit refresh. I didn't do anything else. Now, you may say, okay, that's kind of cool. You know, it's making some changes, but that's not going to be really helpful if I'm in the middle of something. Well, actually it is. Let's go over to the counter page and let's change the counter. Notice, let's zoom in here a little bit. The counter is at 14 right now. So let's go over to the counter and I'm going to say updated counter. And I'll hit save. And now it says updated counter, but the current count still says 14. It remembered my state. It didn't change the state. It just allowed me to make a change to this H1. You may say, cool, but what if I want to change some C# code? Okay, so let's say plus equals 2. We'll hit save. So now we're going to go by 2 instead of by 1. Click once, it's 16. Twice, 18. You say, well, maybe you're double clicking. Okay, so 25. Click once, 43, 68. Okay, so this allows me to make changes as I go. I can leave this up and running. I can make changes to my application. I can tweak it. I can change the HTML, the CSS, the C# code. It doesn't really matter. It will allow me to change this. Now, there are exceptions to this. If we go to the fetch data page, and this is just a sample page that pretends to fetch data, when in reality what it's doing here is it's getting a random set of values. But what if I wanted to make a change to this on-initialized async where I do something else? Maybe I want to say, make this call twice. Oops. I'm going to call this twice so that there's a change now to on-initialized async. And I hit save, and then it says, hey, edits were made which cannot be compiled. Okay, we can't continue until the compile error is fixed. And so either edit to make the changes to the code or stop to stop debugging. Okay, so it says, no, you can't do that. Therefore, hot reload won't work with that change. You can't just keep going. Now, at this point, I need to, actually, I think I can, since I undid it, I think I can make some changes now, like so, and it will still work. So if I edit and continue, but don't apply those changes, it will allow me to keep going. So the point here is, if you're making changes where it has to reload the page or do something else that would be destructive, it's going to say, hey, wait just a minute. I can't keep going with this edit and continue hot reload stuff for this particular change. But for other changes, like we did on the counter page, not a problem. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with hot reload. That's going to be a real game changer when it comes to quickly making changes to your pages. Okay, so let's also look, while we're in here, let's go to fetch data. There is a new feature that allows us to make some changes to the header of our page. Specifically, notice page title. So we have weather forecast here. Notice at the very top of my tab, it says weather forecast. So if I were to change this to Tim's forecast, like so, it's going to now say Tim's forecast in the tab. This is a new feature, this page title, that allows you to put this on and modify the page title based upon your current page. This also means that you can put C# code in here. So let's go back to our counter page, which also has a page title. So let's go back over there. And now for the page title, we're going to put :@ current count. Okay, so it's always going to have, yes, we need to stop and restart because of the fact that it's made a modification that it couldn't continue on. So let's bring it back over here. Let's shrink it back down to the right size. Let's go to our counter page. And notice that up here, we have counter says 0, right? Well, if I were to click, now it says 25, both in the tab and on the page. Notice it continues to change as we change the current count. So you can modify the page title based upon the data that's on this page, not just a static title. All right, so that can be really helpful when you're looking at things like user records, where maybe if you want to bookmark a certain page, you would say, hey, that's the user records page, but which record are we on? Okay, where now you can say record : Corey, Tim. Okay, and then that bookmark will know this is the record for Tim Corey. So really cool stuff you can do here. The page title. There is also the ability to modify other head content. So let's do that. Let's actually stop this, and we'll maximize it for now. And on the counter page, let's make some more modifications to our header. Okay. So we start with head content. And then inside here, we can modify pretty much any of the content in our header. So I can say, let's say meta, and we'll say that the name equals description, and then the content equals, and this is the description of the page, so this is Tim Corey's counter page. Okay, not a great description, but that at least gives us a meta tag to add to our header. So now if I run this, let's wait for it to launch, and I come over here and let's do F12 to inspect, and we go to the elements, we scroll to the top here and look at our head. We do not have a head. Let's zoom in a little bit. We do not have a head that says anything about the description of the page. If I go to counter, we'll now notice right down here, meta name equals description, content equals this is Tim Corey's counter page. Go back off it, it's gone. Go back on it, it's back. So this allows you to modify elements in the head in a way that makes sense for a specific page, not just the overall site. And again, because the fact that we have this on the page, I can make changes to this with C#. So I can modify this, that's an extra tick there. I can modify this so that it's using dynamic C# content. So this, instead of being Tim Corey's, could be, Sue Storm or John Smith or whoever, based upon which page you're on. So again, it can be modified C# code. So that's another modification to Blazor. Let's look at some more. Let's look at what happens if we throw an error. So I'm going to do something bad here. I'm going to say throw new exception. This was a mistake. Okay. Now, obviously, I wouldn't just throw an exception in my code just for fun, but what this is going to do is simulate what happens if your code breaks when you're running your application. So right now, if I were to run this page, go to counter, all looks good, but if I hit click me, it throws the exception. Let's hit continue. This is what the user will see. This unhandled exception has occurred. See browser dev tools for details. Reload. I have to reload the entire site in order to get this cleared. Well, I used to. Now, we don't necessarily have to do that. Now what we can do is we can say, well, hold on, maybe it doesn't affect the whole page, maybe it affects part of the page. For instance, what if I put, let's get rid of that survey prompt. What if I put counter right here? Okay, so now the counter's on the main page. All right, so now the counter is right here. And if I click this, it breaks the whole page. Of course, it pops out. I had to hit continue. And it breaks that whole page. But what I can do is I can wrap this in a new statement, a new way of doing things called an error boundary. So I can say error boundary, and inside here I could just put the counter. Now we're gonna get to a better option, but this is basically a try catch. Okay, so let's run this. Wait for it to load. And now if I hit click me, yes, I get the exception, but when I continue, it's just in that section it says an error has occurred. In fact, if I have multiple of these, let's just put a couple on here, and we'll put a header above this that says H2, this is counter number 2, or counter, there we go. Let me run this again. So now what we can do is we can see that even though, this is an ugly page, but even though I click here and I get an error, and I hit continue, I get the error here, but this one is still live on the page. Now, obviously, if I click the button here, it's gonna fail this one too, but they're now independent, and I could have one component fail on the page, but not the whole page. Now, again, this is pretty ugly and not great, so let's make this better. So what we can do is we can cut this out for a minute. We can say child content, and then inside there put our counter. And then we can say error content, and then inside here we can say, oh, let's say div class equals text danger, and then we can say there was an error loading the counter, something like that. So now we have essentially a try catch where we try this. If it fails, we fall down into this, meaning we're going to display the counter, but when it has an exception, we're going to come down here and display this instead. So if we run this, now I only wrapped the top one, just so you know, but if we run this now, and I say click me, and I continue, it says, hey, there's an error loading the counter. But that's now a whole lot better than what this looks like, which is that. So you can put whatever kind of custom code you want, or even C# code in there that you want to say, hey, this particular item has a problem, but that doesn't mean it has to crash the whole page. Okay, so that's now a really great feature. I got really tired of this. Hey, there's an exception that's handled, that hasn't been handled. The whole page has to be reloaded. The whole site has to be reloaded. Now we can just say, hey, there's a problem with this specific one, because sometimes exceptions happen and you want to handle them this way instead of trying to do a try catch on all your C# code, because you can't always try catch everything. So with that, that's another one of my favorite things. I think those are my big ones. Those are the ones I think, man, this is just pretty awesome. But there are others as well. So for instance, we could change this this current count to be a passed in value. So we could say public int, let's change it to say current count, and let's make it a property like so. And we do have to change everywhere it references current count, just so you know. There isn't a control dot to change that like there will be in a C# code. That's because, just so you know, these Razor pages are incredibly difficult to have IntelliSense and IntelliCode and all the other stuff around them. And the reason why is because we're mixing HTML and C# in line, and then having to figure out what is what. So really difficult stuff. That's why we don't have all the same features we do in just regular C#. But you have to do some modifying manually by hand. But this now has a property, which is public, so I can make this a parameter, which means that I can go over on index and I can say that the current count equals 34, and down here I could say that the current count equals 6, or nothing. I don't have to say it if I don't want to. It's optional. But now what that means is I can have a starting value, notice 34 and 6. I can have a starting value. That's been in Blazor for a while. But now we have a new option, and that is if you come over here, we can say supply parameter from query. So now what happens is, let's run this again. And if we see that it's still 34 and 6, I'm going to counter page at 0. But if on the counter page, I were to say question mark current count equals 37, I hit enter, notice the current count is 37. It read the parameter from the query, from the actual URL. So we can now pull information from our URL and use it to populate our values instead of just modifying it from the Blazor side. Now you can make a modification here so that if you wanted to change this and say name equals, and then in here, let's call this count instead of current count, like so, then this will allow you to change what the parameter is named on the query, on the URL. So if I were to say count equals 28, even though it says count right there, it still updates the value to 28 because I've now renamed this to count. So that's how we now get data from our parameters. So those are the big things for me at least, those are the big things in Blazor that have really made a big impact on .NET 6, but there's a whole lot more. So let's go over to Program.cs, and just down here, I'm going to put a comment section. And we're going to start listing all the other things that are in here that I'm not showing off, but I want to make sure that you're at least aware of. First of all, ahead of time compilation for Blazor WebAssembly. WASM is short for WebAssembly. So ahead of time compilation, this can make your Blazor WebAssembly project run a lot faster in certain circumstances, but it does sacrifice the compile time speed. So it's not a silver bullet we use for everything, but that is a possibility for certain applications. Dynamic components. So we can now do things like having, let's say the counter is the example. We can load the number of counters and the starting values and all the rest right from our C# code. So you can say, probably a better example is pulling users from a database. We can pull users from a database and generate new objects for them on the page dynamically. So that's something new. We also have the ability to call components. Yeah, there you go. From JavaScript. So this is specifically for things like React or Vue or Angular, where you can create components in React, Angular, or Vue that are Blazor components that you can call in, again, Angular, React, or Vue. So that allows you to bring just a piece of Blazor into your Angular app and use it. So the upload file size increased to 2 gigabytes. So if you want to, on the input file, which is just input file, like that, you can upload files that are up to 2 gigabytes in size now. So it's a much bigger ability than we used to have. So there are accessibility improvements. And let me just point out one of those real quick. If we go to, let me refresh my memory here. It's not there. I think it's app. Yes. So in app, this is where we set up, hey, we found the page, or hey, we didn't find the page. Look at the not found page. So we didn't find a page. We have this layout that prints out that says, with an alert that says, hey, sorry, there's nothing at this address, but now notice the role is properly set. So it's not really going to affect a ton of stuff for you, because the fact that it's just the template itself that is more accessible. The things that you do have to also be accessible, but we could do that beforehand. But now the template itself is a little more accessible, a little more friendly for the non-standard ways of using web pages. For example, screen readers, where people can't see or whatever else. This makes it a little easier for them, which is a big deal, and it's definitely a welcome change. So I would encourage you, learn the accessibility for web pages, learn how to do it well, because just because you think, hey, I use the web with my eyes and my mouse, and that's not the way that everyone uses the web, and we need to be able to support a broader audience than just people who can see and can hear and can use a mouse and a keyboard. So that's a nice step in the right direction. So that those accessibility improvements are in there as well. There's also the ability to manipulate the query string. So you saw how I read the query string, but now we can also in Blazor manipulate that query string and change it. That's really helpful for when you want to allow users to bookmark a particular user. So you have one page that you look up a particular user and it displays there. But if your URL is a generic URL, then when they bookmark that, it's going to not know which user to look up. So by manipulating the query string, you can put in there the ID or whatever else in order to be able to look that up later. So that can be really helpful as well. And I did mention before the randomized Kestrel ports, which, by the way, if we go to properties, launch settings.json, we will see the randomized ports that are used. So 5004 for HTTP and 7004 for HTTPS. You can change those. So if you want to go back to make this 5001 and this one 5000, you can do that. I wouldn't encourage that. I would encourage you to leave them the random. That way you can use multiple Kestrel instances at the same time and not step on each other's toes. But that is an option to come in here and change it. So everything for both Kestrel and IIS, all the configuration is in here. You can make modifications to this however you want to fit your particular needs. So those are the big things that are in Blazor. There are other little things. There's some edge case things as well. I would encourage you, if you are really diving deep into Blazor, to check out the change log and all the things that have come to Blazor in .NET 6. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. Again, these are quality of life improvements. You haven't seen anything here that's been game changing, really. I think the biggest game changing change in how we do things is this Program.cs. But here's a cool thing. If you have an existing application, you can upgrade to .NET 6 without doing this. You can still use the Program.cs and the Startup.cs. So both of those can be in place and it won't cause any problems. So just so you know that the upgrade process doesn't have to look like this. You can go back to the old format. You can still use the old format when you're upgrading. It's just that when you're in this new format and you start from the new format, you get this new stuff. So in the project itself, there's a couple of things that we've talked about before with .NET 6, but I want to point them out as well. First of all, implicit usings. They're on by default, which means things like using system. That's going to be by default without having to see it using somewhere. So if we right click on our project and we say open folder in File Explorer, and then we go to the bin directory, we go to debug, net6, and look in here, we will see that that in here, whoops, not the bin directory, sorry. Back up here, obj directory, debug, net6. And then in here, if we look, we're gonna see the entry for our global usings. So Blazor updates.globalusings.g.cs. This is a generated file. Do not modify it. But if you want to look and see what the global usings are, just drag that into Visual Studio, and there are your global usings. So these are all the ones that by default are added to our global usings. I have a video on global usings, how to modify them, turn them on and off, add to them, and so on. But we're already used to a global file, and that's going to be our, right in here, imports.razor. This is separate in Blazor from our global usings. So yes, it's a little confusing. I wish they would have just modified this file for the Blazor project because of the fact that this already serves as our global usings. But it is what it is. So these are our global usings as well. And and that yes, they're marked as @using as opposed to our global using that we'll use in other formats. So it's a little confusing because it's a new feature and they haven't worked out all of the best ways of doing things. But global usings is on, or implicit usings, I'm sorry, is on by default. You can turn that off just by saying false here or deleting this line. Also, nullable is enabled by default. What that means is if you create an object that you want to be nullable, you need to mark it as nullable with a question mark. So for instance, if I were to create a string test like so, it's going to say, hey, it's declared but never used. I could, say test like so, but really, if I want to be able to say null here, then I need to make sure I mark this as nullable, which means I put a question mark in front of it saying, yes, that's okay. Not there though, not in front of test, in front of string. There we go. So this now marks a string as nullable. You can do the same thing with int. You can do the same thing with bool. You can do the same thing with your own types as well. But just note that that's what that nullable feature is for, is it gives you warnings if there's something in there that's null that isn't marked as nullable. That just gives you a better clue as to, are you expecting null here or not? It's not a breaking change. It's not something that's going to stop your app from compiling, but it's going to warn you, hey, you might want to check this and either be explicit here or maybe you have a problem here because you're assigning null to something you don't expect to be null. So that's another feature that's just kind of built into our project. But again, you can take that off if you don't want that. So a lot of these features and a lot of the new changes in .NET 6 in general are not things that you have to use. You're not forced to use them, even if the templates are set up right now for modifying them a specific way. You can change them to the way that works best for your development environment. These are options. Options are good. Being able to have these options is good. And then what you do with those options, you need to think through what your best practices are going to be. Okay, so that's the new changes in Blazor. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on, even more than we showed on video, but I wanted to point out just some of these changes in Blazor because there's some really cool stuff going on. All this stuff applies for Blazor WebAssembly as well. This one in particular is only for Blazor WebAssembly, but in general, these apply to both Blazor Server and WebAssembly. So you can try either one, try it out. Let me know what your thoughts are. What's your favorite feature here? What's your favorite thing that you're like, oh my goodness, I've been missing that. I wanted that. I want to use that. I've got a few of them. I really like all these features. I'm going to be using all of them, I think. All the ones I showed at least today. Some of these I won't use as much, but because I don't do much Angular, React, or Vue development anymore. But this is nice. I like the fact that they're accessible now. The query string manipulation, that's going to be huge, I think, because of, again, being able to bookmark your application and have it load a particular record. Really cool stuff there. So check them out, try them out, let me know what your thoughts are. Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.